On YouTube, I found the old classic horror film, The Stepford Wives, made way back in 1975. And I can understand why it was permeated the mental landscape so well. Because, the movie is basically about, suburban husbands replacing their wives with android duplicates that would, do whatever they wanted. And the film caught the uncanny valley perfectly when it came to behavior. The androids were physically perfect, lifelike, but their behavior was normal but a bit off, and it always gave a creepiness to the film that works really well. It was actually more of an effect than the final reveal that they were being replaced by androids, right? In any event, I could see why back in the 70s and 60s, women and men kind of got fooled into the idea that, feminism might have been worthwhile, because the women of that generation would have been the first of their kind, to grow up with all these opportunities. And so it made sense that they would throw off all the traditional views or ways of living that weren't necessary and just holding them down. But also the idea that, past generations, the women must have been oppressed, instead of realizing it's just that, technology and modern living has allowed freedom for the first time. And so you would see it by, or at least I saw it by the mid-'80s, that, people were beginning to realize this, because mid-'80s the feminists were getting into real trivial concerns, because the old guard of the 60s and 70s, they got everything that seemed like was important, Well, I should say seemed like important. They got rid of all the stuff that wasn't necessary. But that film, though, it had a lot of assumptions. Like, one is the housewives, they had zero personality. And I'd have to say that if you really were a guy who could program an AI that complex, men would not be coming home to these androids that wanted to talk about the favorite soap they bought at the supermarket. That would drive a guy insane. So that's the first thing that wouldn't be true. Guys, matter of fact, real life women talk like that, and it drives a guy insane. No, guys would program these robots to have actual interesting subject matter and discuss and get excited. That's what we really want. And the other mistake they made is that they wouldn't have them be housewives, because the whole point of having the old version of having a housewife was really a mate guarding issue. They wanted to have the women to have only circles with other women, and then husbands themselves, because men feared that, rightfully so, that women would sleep around or put their time to another man, which actually did happen. So guys had proper fear of that. But if you had an android, one of the things you could program is actual fidelity. So you wouldn't have to dress her up in housewife garb and keep her at home. The real worry would be if you got outside, got hit by a car or something, and she got damaged. That's would be the real concern. But there wouldn't be any reason to have any mate guarding rituals involved or activity. So that would be gone with the robots too, or the androids, I should say. So there was a lot of assumptions made about male behavior in that horror film. And of course, like I say, in the 1980s, people started seeing that even then, 30 years ago that women were not really oppressed at all. And that's why when they made a remake of Stepford Wives in 2004, it was just a joke. You know, it was a comedy film that fell flat. People probably don't even remember the film existed, because by then they couldn't pretend that men were holding women back, you know. And yet even 15 years later from then, here we are, that victim narrative is still being put out there. Because it works. I find it just works for the girls. They put the victim narrative out and they get stuff they want. So it's not really about oppression and all that foolishness. It's just the average person is a feminist, whether they're male or female. They give into the victim narrative. They give the girls what they want. And so that's why it's still going. You see, you know, I watched that old film for the first time, really, and I did enjoy it for what it was, because you take it in the era that it was made, and it's still a horror film. You can make a horror film where normal people do act terribly, you know, but in a modern sense, it is an insult to male behavior, you know, because it just doesn't turn out that way. Like, for example, if a guy could get a robot, he wouldn't murder his wife and make an exact duplicate of her. What he would do is make someone who's a lot better looking than his wife, who doesn't look anything like her, and then just tell her, by the way, we're getting divorced or separate. You can have the house, you can have the car, you can have the kids. I've just got this woman I have, this new one, is living in my car with me. Because, of course, the android wives, they wouldn't be grousing him out for not owning stuff. They would be programmed to just want to be with him, for himself. You know, I mean, that's what you think his sex dolls are about. Men are trying to replace, you know, women with something better. They can't. You know, sex dolls will not replace women. But that's what a guy would actually do. He would just, he would get his validation from this android that functions like a woman, and he would just ditch all the dead weight of living with a real woman. That's how it would actually work. Anyway, that's what I have to say about the Stepford Wives. You should watch it, because it is fairly eerie in its make, the original. You probably like it. Okay, goodbye, everyone.